There is a quiet, dangerous shift that happens in the aftermath of narcissistic abuse, and it is rarely discussed with the seriousness it deserves. Survivors often escape environments that were psychologically suffocating, emotionally destabilizing, and in many cases, deeply dehumanizing. Yet after the separation, something unexpected can emerge. Not relief alone, not freedom in its purest form, but a subtle, internal transformation that feels foreign and alarming. The mind, conditioned by prolonged exposure to manipulation, control, gaslighting, and emotional volatility, begins to replicate fragments of the very patterns it once resisted. This is the hidden frontier of healing, the place where survival strategies risk evolving into harmful behaviors, and where the ethical responsibility of recovery becomes essential. The path forward is not simply about feeling better. It is about becoming better without becoming what hurt you. To understand this phenomenon, it is necessary to recognize that narcissistic abuse is not merely a series of negative experiences. It is a systematic conditioning process. Over time, the survivor's nervous system adapts to unpredictability. Their perception of reality becomes destabilized, and their emotional responses are shaped by repeated cycles of idealization, devaluation, and intermittent reinforcement. The brain learns to anticipate chaos, to interpret affection as conditional, and to equate control with safety. When the relationship ends, those learned patterns do not vanish. They remain embedded in cognition, behavior, and emotional regulation. This is where the ethical dimension of healing begins. Many survivors focus on external separation as the primary milestone, going no contact, setting boundaries, physically removing themselves from the abusive environment. While these are critical steps, they represent only the beginning. The deeper work lies in internal disentanglement. Without it, there is a risk that the survivor may unconsciously adopt traits that mirror the abuser: emotional withdrawal, manipulative communication, hypervigilance expressed as control, or even a diminished capacity for empathy. This is not because the survivor is inherently flawed, but because adaptation under prolonged stress often prioritizes survival over integrity. One of the most complex challenges in this process is distinguishing between healthy self-protection and defensive behaviors that replicate harm. For example, setting boundaries is essential, but when boundaries become rigid walls that exclude vulnerability entirely, they may reflect fear rather than strength. Similarly, assertiveness is necessary, but when it shifts into dominance or emotional coercion, it begins to resemble the very dynamics the survivor sought to escape. The line between these states is subtle, and it requires ongoing self-awareness to navigate. The concept of ethical healing introduces a framework that prioritizes not only personal recovery, but also relational responsibility. It asks a critical question: how can you reclaim your autonomy without compromising your humanity? This is not a rhetorical inquiry. It demands intentional practice, continuous reflection, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about one's own behavior. Healing, in this sense, is not passive. It is an active, disciplined process of recalibration. A central component of this recalibration is the restoration of empathy. Narcissistic environments often erode empathy in two directions. The survivor may become excessively empathetic, losing themselves in the needs and emotions of others, or they may suppress empathy as a protective mechanism, becoming detached and emotionally inaccessible. Ethical healing requires a balanced re-engagement with empathy, one that includes both self-compassion and compassion for others, without self-sacrifice or emotional overextension. This balance is difficult to achieve because it involves unlearning extremes and cultivating nuance. Another critical element is accountability. Survivors of narcissistic abuse are not responsible for the harm inflicted upon them, but they are responsible for their actions moving forward. This distinction is essential. It prevents the perpetuation of harm under the justification of past suffering. Accountability does not mean self-blame. It means recognizing the impact of one's behavior and committing to alignment with values that promote integrity and respect. It is an ethical anchor in the recovery process. Emotional regulation plays a pivotal role in this transformation. Narcissistic abuse often leaves individuals with heightened reactivity. Triggers can provoke intense emotional responses that feel disproportionate but are rooted in past experiences. Without effective regulation strategies, these reactions can manifest as aggression, withdrawal, or manipulation. Learning to regulate emotions is not about suppression. It is about developing the capacity to experience emotions fully without being controlled by them. Techniques such as mindfulness, cognitive restructuring, and somatic awareness can support this process, but they require consistency and patience. Communication patterns must also be reevaluated. Survivors may have learned to communicate in ways that were adaptive within the abusive context. Indirectness, people-pleasing, defensiveness, or even strategic manipulation to avoid conflict. These patterns, while once necessary, can undermine healthy relationships. Ethical healing involves cultivating communication that is clear, honest, and respectful. It involves expressing needs without coercion, listening without defensiveness, and engaging in dialogue that prioritizes understanding over control. Trust is another domain that requires careful reconstruction. Narcissistic abuse often destroys trust, not only in others, but also in oneself. Survivors may question their perceptions, doubt their instincts, and struggle to make decisions. Rebuilding trust begins with small, consistent actions that reinforce reliability and self-efficacy. It involves honoring commitments, setting realistic expectations, and gradually allowing vulnerability in safe contexts. Trust cannot be forced. It must be earned through repeated experiences of safety and integrity. The ethical path to healing also requires confronting the allure of revenge or vindication. It is natural to feel anger, resentment, and a desire for justice after being harmed. However, when these emotions drive behavior, they can lead to actions that perpetuate cycles of harm. Ethical healing does not deny these feelings. It acknowledges them while choosing responses that align with long-term well-being rather than immediate gratification. This often involves letting go of the need for external validation or retribution and focusing instead on internal restoration. Identity reconstruction is another critical aspect of recovery. Narcissistic abuse often involves identity erosion, where the survivor's sense of self is diminished or reshaped to fit the needs of the abuser. Healing requires reclaiming and redefining identity based on authentic values, preferences, and goals. This process can be disorienting because it involves exploring who you are outside of the context of the abusive relationship. It may involve experimenting with new interests, reevaluating beliefs, and establishing a sense of self that is independent and self-directed. Boundaries, when understood within an ethical framework, become more than protective measures. They become expressions of self-respect and mutual respect. Healthy boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about defining what is acceptable and what is not, and communicating those limits clearly. They are flexible, context-sensitive, and grounded in self-awareness. Importantly, They are enforced consistently, not through aggression or punishment, but through aligned action. One of the most profound shifts in ethical healing is the transition from survival mode to growth mode. In survival mode, the focus is on avoiding harm, minimizing risk, and maintaining stability. In growth mode, the focus expands to include personal development, meaningful connections, and purposeful living. This transition is gradual and requires a sense of safety that may take time to establish. It also requires a willingness to embrace uncertainty and to engage with life beyond the constraints of past experiences. Support systems play a crucial role in this journey. Healing in isolation can reinforce distorted perceptions and limit opportunities for corrective experiences. Engaging with supportive individuals, whether friends, family, or professionals, provides a context for practicing new behaviors and receiving feedback. However, it is important to choose support systems that align with ethical principles and that do not replicate dynamics of control or dependency. Therapeutic intervention can be particularly valuable in navigating the complexities of post-narcissistic recovery. Approaches such as trauma-informed therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and attachment-based therapy offer frameworks for understanding and addressing the impact of abuse. Therapy provides a structured environment for exploring patterns, processing emotions, and developing skills. It also introduces an external perspective that can challenge cognitive distortions and support accountability. The role of self-reflection cannot be overstated. Ethical healing requires ongoing introspection, examining thoughts, behaviors, and motivations with honesty and curiosity. This is not about self-criticism. It is about self-awareness. Reflection allows for the identification of patterns that may be unconscious and provides an opportunity to make intentional changes. It is a continuous process that evolves over time. Forgiveness is often misunderstood in the context of narcissistic abuse. It is not about excusing harmful behavior or reconciling with the abuser. Rather, it is about releasing the hold that the experience has on your emotional state. Forgiveness in this sense is an internal process that frees the individual from ongoing resentment. It is optional and should not be rushed or imposed. What matters is the ability to move forward without being anchored to past harm. Ethical healing also involves redefining power. In abusive dynamics, power is often associated with control, dominance, and manipulation. In healthy contexts, power is redefined as autonomy, influence, and responsibility. It is the ability to make choices aligned with one's values, to affect outcomes through constructive means, and to take responsibility for one's actions. This redefinition is crucial for preventing the replication of harmful dynamics. The integration of these elements, empathy, accountability, emotional regulation, communication, trust, identity, boundaries, growth, support, reflection, forgiveness, and power, creates a comprehensive framework for ethical healing. It is not a linear process, and setbacks are inevitable. What matters is the commitment to continue, to learn, and to adjust. Ultimately, the question is not whether you can heal, but how you choose to heal. The path you take will shape not only your own experience, but also the experiences of those around you. Choosing an ethical path is a deliberate decision to break cycles of harm, to embody values that promote well-being, and to contribute to relationships that are grounded in respect and authenticity. Beyond the pain, beyond the conditioning, beyond the instinct to protect at all costs, there is an opportunity to rebuild, not just a life, but a way of being that is fundamentally different from what you endured. This is the essence of ethical healing. It is not about perfection. It is about alignment. It is about becoming someone who, even after experiencing profound harm, chooses not to perpetuate it. And that choice, repeated consistently over time, is what transforms recovery into something far more powerful than survival. It becomes a form of integrity that cannot be taken away, a foundation for relationships that are genuinely reciprocal, and a testament to the possibility of change that does not require becoming what you once feared.